So I met Iftekhar through Masoon, and we all became fast friends. And I learned through them that that Iftekhar had experience in his family with a child who transitioned. And the way that Iftekhar talked about it, I was so actually really surprised, because in my family, like LGBTQ issues and coming out and just being different in any way was very challenging, and it made it hard for me to ask questions and to learn to be myself, you know. And so I was like, oh, Iftekhar, I really wish you were my dad. And
Same.
there you go. So then we started talking more and more about it, and Iftekhar was like, you know, my neighbor has a similar experience, Rekha. And I was like, are you kidding me? Your neighbor? So then I was like, wait a minute, there's a whole community of South Asian parents who have positive, I mean, obviously complex, but positive experiences with welcoming sexual gender diversity in their homes. And I was like, this is something that we need to share with the world. And I had then invited them to maybe talk about it, because I feel like we often hear about our experiences as like gender diverse people, just as peers, as young people, and we don't really hear from our parents.
So I'm a very proud parent of a trans child who's sitting right here, my son Manny, and I have 3 children, and for a significant portion of their growing up, I was a single parent. And my experience, as Faiz mentioned, is a little bit different from a typical South Asian or Indian subcontinental tradition. And I think I've thought about it a lot. A lot of factors play into how people of my generation, behave and interact with their children, especially, when it comes to gender diversity and sexual freedom. And usually the reactions are negative, they are conservative. Many grew up with me. So at that point, it was not a question for me, in terms of his identity, that he wants to change and be who he really wants to be or who he really is. It did create some complexities within me, and eventually I realized that this is my problem, not his problem. That I have to deal with it in my own way. And one great thing that helped me, that I'm essentially a scientist, I'm an engineer. I try to rationalize and think in a rational, fact-based. I know that now I'm kind of diverting away from the emotional stuff. So I always look at complexities and issues in a fact-based, science-based approach. And that also helped me a lot, because I started informing myself, I started reading about it, I started talking to Manny about it, and then it became much, much simpler for me. I'm very fortunate that my siblings thought the way I thought. So there was some fear initially, but at one point I just talked to them about it, and they were fine. Mm-hmm. And I think the most impressive thing I found was my mother. She's 92 now. Then I think one day I talked to my sister, and my sister said, we'll just tell her that Manny is a man, and Manize is going to be Manny, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And it was as simple as that. Mm-hmm. I was very impressed, because my mother never questioned it. Mm-hmm. And to this day now, she uses the right pronoun.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she will ask me, and she speaks mostly Urdu, right? So she uses the right pronouns in Urdu. Which is even more impressive for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Iftekhar just said, I knew it was about me, and I had to work on myself. That point for me came really very late. My experience wasn't anything as easygoing as what Iftekhar said. I'm a scientist too, but none of the science helped me. I was born in the state of Kerala in India, in a very progressive family. And in my life, I've never discriminated anybody based on caste, creed, or anything. But when I came to this country, I was about 22, and I hadn't had much exposure with the LGBTQ community. I had heard of these things, but everything was hush-hush, spoken very softly, things were under the carpet. And when you hear of these things, you always sympathize, and you don't think these things touch you anyway. Till 2009, when my own child came to me and said today I addressed them as they, but she was gay. I think I was sick to my stomach. I did not know how to handle it. I was part of this community that would not understand it. We have forgotten that being a Hindu is accepting people as who they are. That is the Sanatana Dharma. Accepting people as to who you are. And when my daughter here in the audience, she could support my child much better than I did. She would say, it is not about you accepting. There is nothing to accept because you want to fashion your child on your own image. You want them to be, and especially when I was having my children, I wanted women, I wanted girls, and I wanted women power. And I realized it doesn't matter whether you're a woman or a man, power is power. And my child is doing extremely well. Therapist today and everything else. But it took me a long time to accept my child as to who they should be or they are. I had this idea in my head as to how they should be, which was the biggest mistake I think I made, and I'm still getting used to it, and it's still work in progress. So I'm not saying I'm there yet.
So first of all, hi, my name is Shahroze. I'm non-binary. My pronouns are they, them, she, her. Honestly, hearing those stories, it to me just translates kind of as something that I know, or I don't really at this point have hope that my parents could have, because those stories exist out there. And I also want to preface this by saying my story, despite being one where I didn't experience the love and acceptance that both these parents are showing their kids, despite it being that, it's not a story of sadness. Because I'm still here. Just as Rekha put, I did not need to be accepted. I only needed to accept myself within myself. And if my parents and some of my family members wanted to jump ship at that was fair, and they could do that. For me, I had a dual understanding where it was an understanding of my own frustration and identity that, I have this identity and this person is refusing to accept it, which doesn't make sense. But there was also an understanding that my family coming to Canada and the US, I had an understanding that they had a fear of being personally colonized. And it was their distorted idea that, queerness was a Western and white and colonial ideology that was introduced to our community. When really it's been an element in our very, very deep history for centuries beyond what any colonizer could try to divert. So for me, my journey was one, and it continues to be one, of struggle, of coming at peace with the fact that I may never get understanding or acceptance, but it's never something that I needed. I just needed acceptance and strength on my own to stand on my own 2 feet and to recognize, I can create supports around myself. I can create familial connections around myself. There isn't necessarily a need for me to wait for the approval or acceptance of my parents until I can fully become myself. Of course, logistically there is a need where